The reading room smelled of leather and old tobacco, and Willa Oakes had never felt more aware of her own breathing as she sat surrounded by men who held their silence like a weapon. She smoothed the parchment across the mahogany table, cleared her throat once, and began. I, Jeremiah William Clayton, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament. Her voice carried clearly through the room, trained from years of reading aloud in households where literacy was scarce and valued. The lawyer who had hired her, Mr. Pemberton, stood by the window with his hands clasped behind his back, nodding slightly as she continued through the formal opening. Around the table sat 4 men. The eldest was Harrison Clayton, whose silver mustache twitched every time she mentioned a piece of property. Beside him sat his 2 sons, both thick through the shoulders and wearing identical expressions of forced patience. And then there was the youngest grandson, positioned directly across from her, whose eyes she could feel on her face rather than the document she held. She had noticed him the moment she arrived at the ranch that morning. He had been the one to take her carpetbag, to offer his arm up the porch steps, to pull out her chair in this very room. Jace Clayton, she had learned, 24 years old and a cowhand on his own family's ranch by choice rather than necessity. His hair was the color of wheat in late summer, and when he smiled, which seemed to be often, a dimple appeared in his left cheek. Now, as she read through parcels of land and herds of cattle, shares in the Union Pacific and mining stakes in Colorado, she kept her gaze firmly on the pages. But she knew he was watching her. She could sense it the way a rider senses a change in weather. To my grandson Jace William Clayton, I leave the southern grazing land, 500 head of cattle, and the old line shack where he has spent more nights than in a proper bed, being the kind of fool who prefers his own company and hard work to the easy life his birthright might afford him. A low chuckle rumbled through the room. She glanced up for just a second and found Jace grinning, unashamed. Their eyes met. He did not look away. She returned to the document, feeling heat climb her neck. Furthermore, I leave him my collection of books, small though it may be, in hopes that he might finally learn that there is wisdom to be found between covers as well as under open sky. Never could get the boy to read, Harrison muttered. I can read just fine, grandfather, Jace said mildly. I just prefer doing to sitting. Willa continued, working through smaller bequests, personal items, instructions for the maintenance of the main house. Her throat grew dry. Mr. Pemberton, anticipating this, had placed a glass of water within reach. She took a careful sip and resumed. The final section proved more complex. Old Jeremiah had included a clause requiring his heirs to maintain the ranch as a single operation for no less than 10 years, with specific conditions about selling shares or dividing the property. The language was dense, full of legal repetitions and conditional statements that looped back on themselves. Willa read it twice, slowly, aware that everyone in the room was now listening with the same intensity Jace had been watching her. When she finished, she set the papers down and folded her hands. That concludes the reading of the will. Mr. Pemberton will answer any questions you might have regarding the execution of these terms. The room erupted in voices. Harrison wanted clarification on the 10-year clause. His sons argued about the division of the northern and southern lands. Jace alone remained quiet, still looking at Willa with an expression she could not quite name. Mr. Pemberton raised his hands. "Gentlemen, please. Miss Oakes has completed her service. I will meet with each of you individually to discuss your concerns." He turned to her. "Miss Oakes, your fee will be delivered to your boarding house this evening. Thank you for your excellent work." She stood, gathering her shawl. Jace was on his feet immediately, coming around the table. Let me see you to your buggy, Miss Oakes. That is not necessary. Maybe not, he said, but I would like to. Outside, the September afternoon was fine and clear, the kind of weather that made Wyoming territory feel like a place where a person might put down roots instead of just passing through. The ranch spread out in all directions, vast and well kept, with the Big Horn Mountains rising in the distance like a promise. Jace carried her carpetbag to the buggy, but he did not hand it up to her immediately. Instead, he stood there, turning his hat in his hands. "You read real fine," he said. "Thank you. It is my profession." "Is it now? You make a living just reading to folks." "I do. There are many who cannot read themselves or who have difficulty with legal documents. I provide a service." He nodded slowly. "Must have read a lot of things, interesting things. Wills mostly. Contracts, occasionally letters from family back east." "Letters," he repeated, as if the word had given him an idea. "Say, Miss Oakes, do you take private clients, besides the lawyers, I mean?" She studied him, suspicious of the question. "On occasion. Why?" "Well, I have some letters. Business correspondence, you know. And my grandfather was right about one thing. I am not much for sitting still with paperwork. If I hired you to come back and read them to me, would you?" It was a ridiculous request. A grown man, clearly intelligent, asking her to read his mail like he was a child. But his eyes were earnest, and Mr. Pemberton's fee had been modest. She could use the extra income. "I charge 50 cents an hour. Done. Can you come tomorrow?" "I have another appointment in the morning." The afternoon would be possible. 2 o'clock. "I will meet you at the main house." She agreed, though something in his eagerness made her wonder exactly what kind of letters required such urgent attention. He handed her up into the buggy with unnecessary care, his hand warm even through her glove. As she drove away, she glanced back once and saw him still standing there, watching her go. The boarding house where she rented a room was in Fargo proper, a 12-mile drive from the Clayton ranch. Mrs. Henderson, who ran the establishment, met her at the door with her usual questions about who had hired her and whether they had paid promptly. Willa assured her the fee would arrive by evening and escaped to her room, a small, neat space with a bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the street. She removed her hat and gloves, splashed water on her face, and tried not to think about the way Jace Clayton had looked at her across that table. She had been hired to read documents in a dozen households across the territory. Men had looked at her before, some with interest, some with disdain for a woman who dared to claim expertise in letters. She had learned to ignore both varieties of attention, but Jace had looked at her like she was something more than a curiosity. Like he was genuinely interested in what she might say next. It meant nothing, she told herself. He was a rancher's grandson, heir to land and cattle and a legacy that stretched back decades. She was a woman who made her living reading other people's words because her own father had died when she was 16, leaving her with no inheritance except the education he had insisted she receive. They inhabited different worlds, even when they sat in the same room. The next afternoon, she returned to the Clayton ranch, driving her buggy under the wooden arch that marked the entrance to the property. Jace was waiting on the porch, and he bounded down the steps before she had even set the brake. "Miss Oakes, right on time." "Punctuality is a professional necessity, Mr. Clayton. Please call me Jace. Mr. Clayton makes me sound like my grandfather, and he is dead now, so that seems wrong." She allowed him to help her down, though she was perfectly capable of managing herself. "Very well. Where are these letters you need read?" He led her not to the formal reading room where she had sat yesterday, but to a smaller office off the main hall. A desk sat beneath a window, covered in neat stacks of paper. He gestured to a comfortable chair. "I appreciate you coming all this way." You are paying me to do so. Right? Yes. He shuffled through the papers and selected a single envelope. This one, if you would. She opened it, drew out the letter, and read. It was a brief note from a cattle buyer in Cheyenne, confirming receipt of payment for a recent sale. It took perhaps 30 seconds to read aloud. Jace nodded thoughtfully. Good to know. And this one? The second letter was from a feed supplier, listing prices for grain and hay. The third was from Harrison Clayton himself, written before his death, thanking his grandson for repairing a fence line. Each letter was brief, straightforward, and utterly unremarkable. After 45 minutes, Willa set down the final page and looked at Jace directly. Mr. Clayton, I hope you will not think me impertinent, but you could have read all of these yourself in a fraction of the time it has taken me. Probably, he admitted, but I would not have heard them in your voice. The statement hung in the air between them. She felt her face warm. I am not sure that is a sufficient reason to pay for my services. Seems sufficient to me. He leaned back in his chair, that easy smile appearing again. Besides, I like the company. Gets lonely out here sometimes. Nothing but cattle and horses and my cousins arguing about property lines. You chose to work as a cowhand rather than manage the business side of the ranch. I did, and I stand by that choice, but it does not mean I never want conversation with someone whose world is bigger than the next water source. She considered him. There was a sincerity beneath the charm, she thought. A loneliness that he wore lightly, but that was real nonetheless. What would you like me to read next time? She asked. His face lit up. There will be a next time. If you continue to pay my fee, I will continue to provide my services. But perhaps we might find more substantial material than feed orders. I have a newspaper, he offered immediately. 3 days old, but I have not looked at it yet. That would be acceptable. They agreed she would return in 2 days. As he walked her to her buggy, he said, Do you like this work, Miss Oakes? Truly, I do. I enjoy books, I enjoy reading, and I enjoy the independence it affords me. Not many professions allow a woman to make her own way. You are good at it. You have a voice that makes even a feed order sound important. She laughed despite herself. That is a dubious compliment, Mr. Clayton. Jace, he corrected, and I meant it sincerely. Over the following weeks, a pattern established itself. Twice a week, Willa drove out to the Clayton ranch and read to Jace whatever he had managed to procure. Newspapers, letters, a catalog from a seed company, even a pamphlet about new barbed wire designs. The material was never challenging, never required her particular skills, and they both knew it. But the conversations that followed the readings, those were something else entirely. He told her about growing up on the ranch, about his grandfather teaching him to ride before he could walk, about the year the winter had been so harsh they lost half the herd. She told him about her father, a school teacher who had believed his daughter deserved the same education as any son, about her mother who had died when Willa was young, about learning to make her own way in a territory that was still deciding what kind of place it wanted to be. You could teach, Jace said one afternoon in early October. They were sitting in the office, the remains of the reading, an agricultural report from the territorial government scattered on the desk. You have the knowledge for it. Teaching requires staying in one place, accepting whatever wage the school board decides to pay, and tolerating the oversight of men who believe they know better than I do how children should learn. My current work allows me freedom. Freedom is good, he agreed. I turned down a desk in my grandfather's office for the same reason. My father thought I was a fool. Were you, maybe, but I am a happy fool, and that counts for something. She smiled. He made her smile often now, she realized. The initial awkwardness had faded into something easier, warmer. She looked forward to these afternoons in a way that had nothing to do with the fee he paid. The trouble started in late October. Harrison Clayton arrived at one of their reading sessions unannounced, his face set in grim lines. Jace stood immediately. "Grandfather Harrison, what is wrong?" "We need Miss Oakes to look at the will again. There is a question about the 10-year clause." Willa's heart sank. She had known the clause was complicated, had sensed it might cause problems. "What kind of question?" "My sons believe there is a provision that allows for early division of the property if all heirs agree. I do not recall such a provision, but they insist it is there, hidden in all that legal language. Mr. Pemberton has taken ill and cannot review it himself. We need your eyes on it." She agreed immediately, and they moved to the formal reading room where she had sat that first day. The will was produced from a locked cabinet. She read through it once, then twice, focusing on the dense final section. "There is no such provision," she said finally. "The clause is absolute. 10 years of joint operation, no exceptions." "That is what I thought," Harrison said, satisfaction in his voice. "However," Willa continued, and all three men looked at her sharply, "there is a secondary clause here that I did not fully parse during the initial reading. It states that if any heir attempts to dissolve the partnership before the 10-year period, that heir forfeits his entire share, which is then divided among the remaining heirs." Silence fell. Harrison's face had gone pale. "Read that section again." She did, slowly and carefully. The language was buried in subordinate clauses, easy to miss on a first reading, but unmistakable once you knew to look for it. "My sons have been pressuring me to agree to sell the northern section to a mining company," Harrison said quietly. "If I had agreed, if we had all signed the papers they prepared, I would have lost everything." Jace was staring at his grandfather with something like horror. "They knew. They must have known or suspected, and they thought they could trick you into it. Perhaps. Or perhaps they simply did not read carefully enough." Harrison turned to Willa. "I owe you a debt, Miss Oakes. You may have saved this ranch. I simply read what was written. You read it better than any of us, including the lawyer. That is no small thing." Over the next week, the family turmoil settled into a tense peace. Harrison confronted his sons, who claimed ignorance of the clause, and whether that was true or not, the matter was dropped. But the incident changed something on the ranch. Harrison began consulting Jace more, bringing him into the business discussions he had previously handled alone. And Jace, in turn, began to seem more settled, more certain of his place through it all. Willa continued her visits. But now, when Jace handed her reading material, there was often a spark of humor in his eyes. "A seed catalog," she said one afternoon in November, taking the booklet from his hands. "I need to know what to plant in the spring," he said, utterly straight-faced. "You have been planting crops your entire life, but I have never had them read to me in such a lovely voice." She felt her cheeks warm. "Mr. Clayton." "Jace," he corrected automatically. Then more seriously, "Willa, I think we both know I do not really need you to read me seed catalogs." Her heart was beating too fast. "Then why do you keep asking me back?" "Because I like being near you. Because I think about you when you are not here. Because reading time is the best part of my week, and it has nothing to do with the words on the page." He took a breath. "I am courting you, Willa. Badly, perhaps, and with the flimsiest excuses a man ever invented, but that is what this is." She should have seen it coming. Perhaps she had seen it and had been pretending otherwise because acknowledging it would require her to make a choice. "I am not sure that is wise." "Why not?" "Because you are a rancher's heir and I am a woman who reads for hire. Because we come from different worlds. Because this, what we have been doing, it exists in a kind of bubble, but the real world is larger and more complicated." "The real world is what we make it," Jace said. He moved closer, not touching her, but near enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his blue eyes. I do not care about different worlds. I care that you are the smartest, most interesting person I have ever met. I care that when you read, even about barbed wire, I could listen forever. I care that you make me want to be better, to know more, to understand the things you understand. Jace, she whispered, and found she had no other words. I am not asking you to decide anything right now. I am just asking you to let me keep courting you, to see where this might go. Can you do that? She thought about the weeks of reading, the conversations, the way he listened to her opinions as if they mattered. She thought about the loneliness of her boarding house room, the careful independence she had built, and whether holding on to it was worth letting this slip away. Yes, she said, I can do that. His smile was like sunrise. Good. Because I have a whole stack of livestock reports you have not seen yet. She laughed, and the sound seemed to fill the room with light. Winter arrived early that year, bringing snow that piled against the ranch buildings and made the 12-mile drive from town treacherous. Jace insisted she stay over when the weather was poor, and Mrs. Clayton, Harrison's wife, whom Willa had barely met before, proved a gracious hostess. She gave Willa a room in the main house and seemed amused by her grandson's transparent devotion. He has never brought a woman home before, she confided one evening while Jace was out checking on the horses. I had begun to think he would marry his saddle. We are not engaged, Mrs. Clayton. Not yet, the older woman said placidly, but you will be. I have eyes, girl. And I have been married for 40 years. I know what love looks like when it is growing. Willa could not deny it, not to herself anymore. She had fallen in love with Jace Clayton, with his easy laugh and his genuine kindness, and the way he treated her skill with words as something valuable rather than merely useful. When he looked at her, she felt seen in a way she had never experienced before. The proposal came in December, during a reading session that had devolved, as they often did now, into simple conversation. It was snowing outside, big fat flakes that blurred the windows and made the office feel like a warm island in a white sea. "Marry me," Jace said, right in the middle of her telling him about a book she had read. She stopped mid-sentence. "What, marry me?" he repeated. He slid out of his chair and knelt on the floor beside hers, taking her hands. "I know I should make a speech, should tell you all the reasons why, but the truth is just this. I love you. I want to spend my life listening to you read and talking with you and learning from you. I want to build something with you, something that is ours. Marry me, Willa, please." Tears were streaming down her face, though she could not remember starting to cry. "I love you too. Yes. Yes, of course, yes." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, and she felt the last of her careful independence crack open to make room for something larger, something shared. They married in February 1889, in a simple ceremony at the ranch with family and neighbors in attendance. Willa wore a dress of cream wool that Mrs. Clayton had helped her sew, and Jace wore a new suit that made him look uncomfortable until he took off the jacket after the vows and rolled up his sleeves. "Better," Willa said, laughing. "I am a cowhand at heart," he said, pulling her close. "You will have to take me as I am. I would not want you any other way." The ranch became her home. She had worried a little about giving up her independence, about being swallowed into the life of a rancher's wife. But Jace had other ideas. A week after the wedding, he took her to one of the outbuildings, a sturdy structure that had been used for storage. "I thought you could set up here," he said. "For your reading service. There is space for a desk, for shelves, for clients to sit. You could keep working if you wanted to. I know it is important to you." She looked at the empty building, seeing it not as it was but as it could be. "I could teach reading too," she said slowly. "There are so many people in the territory who never had the chance to learn." "You could," he agreed. "Whatever you want to do, Willa. I am just here to help make it possible." Word spread quickly that Mrs. Clayton offered reading and writing services, and soon Willa had a steady stream of clients. Cowboys who needed letters written to family back east, women who wanted to learn their numbers so they could keep their own household accounts, children whose parents worked too hard to send them to the distant school in town. She charged modest fees, sometimes accepted payment in eggs or vegetables, and found more satisfaction in the work than she had ever expected. Jace helped when he could, building shelves for the books she began to collect, riding into town to post letters, sitting quietly in the corner while she taught reading to a rancher's wife who blushed at her own mistakes. "You are good at this," he told her one evening after her last student had left. "You have a gift for making people feel safe when they are learning. My father taught me that. He always said education should never be about shame, only about opening doors. He would be proud of you." She thought he would be. She thought he would be proud of all of it, the life she had built, the man she had married, the way she had found a purpose that was entirely her own. Their first child arrived in the spring of 1890, a daughter they named Zara. She had Willa's dark hair and Jace's blue eyes, and from the beginning she seemed fascinated by books, reaching for the pages whenever Willa read aloud. "She is going to be just like you," Jace said, watching his daughter grab at a volume of poetry. "Heaven help us all if she is. I am serious. Look at her. She already knows books are important." Willa laughed, but privately she hoped he was right. She wanted her daughter to grow up knowing that her mind was valuable, that her words mattered, that she could make her own way in the world if she chose to. Their second child, a son they named Ryder, arrived 2 years later. He was louder than his sister had been, more interested in the horses than in books, but he sat still for story time with an attentiveness that surprised them both. "He likes your voice," Jace said, "just like his father." By 1893, the reading room had become too small for Willa's ambitions. She had been nurturing an idea for months, talking it through with Jace in the evenings after the children were asleep. Now, with his encouragement, she approached Harrison with a proposal. "I want to build a library," she said. "A real one with books people can borrow and a school room where anyone can come to learn to read and write. It would serve the whole county, not just the ranch." Harrison was old now, his hair white and his movements slow, but his mind was as sharp as ever. "What would you need?" "Land, lumber, money for books and supplies, and time, of course. The land you can have, a parcel near the main road where people can reach it easily. As for the rest, I will fund it. Consider it an investment in the territory's future." He smiled. "And in my great-grandchildren's education." Construction began that summer. Jace took charge of the building itself, working alongside hired carpenters to raise a sturdy structure with large windows to let in light. Willa planned the interior, corresponding with booksellers in Chicago and New York, soliciting donations from anyone who might have volumes to spare. The library opened in the fall of 1893, a bright October day much like the one when Willa had first arrived at the ranch to read old Jeremiah's will. She stood on the porch of the new building, looking at the shelves she had stocked, at the rows of benches for students, at the desk where she would sit and help people find the words they needed. Jay stood beside her, holding Ryder on his hip while Zara clung to Willa's skirts. "Are you ready?" he asked. "I think so. It is strange being nervous about something I wanted so much. You are going to change lives here, Willa. You already have, and this is just going to reach more people." The first visitors arrived before noon. A young woman who wanted to learn to read so she could write to her sister in Ohio. An old rancher who had never had time for schooling and was tired of relying on others to handle his paperwork. A mother with 3 children, hoping they might borrow books to read at home. By the end of the day, Willa had enrolled 12 students in reading classes and loaned out 20 books. She was exhausted and exhilarated in equal measure. "I knew you could do it," Jace said that night, after they had put the children to bed. They sat together in the parlor of their own house, a smaller structure Jace had built for their family a short distance from the main ranch house. "I knew it from the first day I saw you, reading that will like you were proclaiming something holy. You did not know anything of the sort. You were just looking for an excuse to see me again." "True," he admitted cheerfully, "but I was right about you anyway. You are remarkable, Willa Clayton." "We are remarkable," she corrected. "I could not have done any of this without you. We make a good team. We do." Their third child arrived in 1895, another daughter they named Daisy. By then the library had become a fixture of the county, a place where children came after school and adults gathered for occasional lectures. Willa taught classes 3 days a week, spent 2 more days running the lending service, and somehow still found time to read to her own children every night. Jace, for his part, had taken on more responsibility on the ranch as Harrison aged. He managed the southern section, the land his grandfather had left him, with the same quiet competence he brought to everything. But he always made time to help with the library, to build new shelves when the old ones filled, to deliver books to people too far away to visit in person. "Do you ever regret it?" Willa asked him one evening. They were sitting on their porch, watching the sun set over the Big Horn Mountains. "Marrying me, I mean. Your life would have been simpler if you had chosen someone from your own world." "My life would have been emptier," he said flatly. "You are my world, Willa. You and our children and the work we do together. I have never regretted a single moment." She leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his shoulder, the steady beat of his heart. "I love you, Jace Clayton. I love you too. Even if you do keep making me read now that I cannot use ignorance as an excuse to see you." She laughed. He had, in fact, become a much more avid reader since their marriage, though he still preferred her voice to his own. Most evenings found them reading together, sometimes from the same book, sometimes each absorbed in their own volume, content in the shared silence. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and small triumphs. The library expanded twice more, adding a separate room for children, and another for the growing collection of newspapers and periodicals Willa acquired. Students who had learned to read in her classes went on to teach their own children, creating ripples of literacy that spread far beyond the ranch. Jace's cousins, Harrison's other grandsons, eventually reconciled with the family after a period of estrangement. They came to accept that the ranch was stronger unified, that their grandfather had been wise to bind them together. At family gatherings now, the tension had eased into something more like friendly rivalry, arguments over cattle breeds and water rights instead of inheritance and betrayal. Harrison passed in 1898, peacefully in his sleep. The whole county turned out for his funeral, a testament to the life he had built and the legacy he was leaving behind. In his personal effects, they found a letter addressed to Jace and Willa, written shortly before his death. Willa read it aloud, as she read everything important in their lives. "My dear grandchildren," it began. "I am writing this in sound mind, though perhaps not sound body, to tell you what I did not say often enough while I lived. You have built something beautiful together, something that reaches beyond land and cattle to touch the lives of everyone in this territory. The library, the school, the way you have opened your home and your hearts to others, this is the truest legacy anyone could hope for. I am proud to have played a small part in bringing you together, and I am grateful that I lived long enough to see what you have created. May you continue to read to each other, to your children, and to all who need the words you can provide. With love and admiration, Harrison Clayton." Tears streamed down Willa's face as she finished. Jace put his arm around her, his own eyes wet. "He was a good man," he said. "He was. And he would be happy to know that we are keeping his ranch whole, just as he wanted." The 10-year period specified in old Jeremiah's will had long since passed, but by then it no longer mattered. The family had learned to work together, had discovered that unity was stronger than division. The ranch prospered, the library thrived, and the Clayton name became associated not just with cattle and land, but with learning and community. By the turn of the century, the library held over 1,000 volumes, and Willa had trained 3 other women to help with the teaching and lending. The school room hosted classes 6 days a week, and there was talk of establishing a formal school district with the library as its center. "You did this," Jace told her, watching a class of children recite their letters. "You took a skill, a talent that people did not think was worth much, and you turned it into something that changed everything." "We did this," she corrected, as she always did. "I may have had the idea, but you built it. You supported it. You believed in it even when I was not sure it would work." "I believed in you," he said simply. That was always enough. Their children grew. Zara proved to be as bookish as her mother, spending hours in the library and already talking about becoming a teacher herself. Ryder was more interested in the ranch, following his father around the property and learning the business of raising cattle. Daisy, the youngest, seemed to combine both interests, equally happy with a book or a horse. "We have good children," Willa said one evening, watching them play in the yard. "We do. Think we should try for more," she laughed. 3 is plenty, Jace Clayton. I have my hands full as it is." "Fair enough, though I would not have minded a whole houseful if they all turned out like these." The years 1900 and 1901 brought changes to the territory. There was talk of statehood, of Wyoming being admitted to the Union officially. Though that had actually already happened in 1890, Willa reminded people. Progress was everywhere. More railroads, more towns, more people arriving every year to make their homes in the wide open spaces. Through it all, the library remained a constant. Willa added new books, started a traveling library that carried volumes to outlying ranches, organized reading circles where adults could discuss literature. She was 40 now, her hair beginning to show threads of silver, but she felt more alive than ever. Jace, at 41, was still the same easy, smiling cowhand at heart, though he now managed a sizable portion of the ranch and sat on the county planning board. He had grown into his responsibilities without losing the warmth that had first drawn Willa to him, and she loved him more with each passing year. "Do you remember the first time I hired you?" he asked one night. They were sitting in the library after closing, surrounded by the books they had collected together. "To read those letters that I could have read perfectly well myself. I remember thinking you were either very lazy or very transparent." "Both," he admitted with a grin. "But it worked, did it not?" "It did. Though I am still not sure whether I should be flattered or insulted that you thought you needed an excuse to court me. I was 24 and you were the most intimidating woman I had ever met. I needed all the help I could get." "Intimidating?" She looked at him in surprise, completely. "You were so smart, so self-possessed, so sure of your own worth. I was just a cowhand with dirt under his nails and no idea how to talk to a woman like you." "You did just fine," she said softly. "You did better than fine. You saw me, Jace. Not just as a skill to be hired or a curiosity to be examined, but as a person. That meant everything." He reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. "And you saw me as more than just a rancher's grandson. You treated me like I had a mind worth engaging, even when I was handing you seed catalogs to read." They sat in comfortable silence, surrounded by the physical manifestation of their shared dreams. Outside, the Wyoming night was clear and cold, stars brilliant in the darkness. Inside, the shelves stood full, waiting for tomorrow's readers. "We should get home," Willa said eventually. "The children will wonder where we are." "They know where we are. We are always here when we are not at the ranch, true enough." They walked back to their house hand in hand, as they had walked countless times before. The path was familiar, worn smooth by their feet, and Willa thought about all the paths their lives had taken since that first day in the reading room. Every choice, every chance, every moment of courage or fear had led them here. In 1903, the library celebrated its 10th anniversary with a grand party. It seemed half the county attended, people spilling out of the building and onto the grounds. There were speeches, though Willa kept hers mercifully short, and refreshments and a reading from Zara, who at 13 already had her mother's clear, compelling voice. "I am so proud of you," Jace told Willa as they stood together watching the celebration. "Of everything you have accomplished." "Everything we have accomplished," she said automatically. "Yes," he agreed. "Everything we have accomplished together, and everything we will accomplish still." Because they were not finished, she knew. There were more books to acquire, more students to teach, more lives to touch. The work was never done, but that was all right. It gave them purpose, gave them direction, gave them a reason to wake up each morning and face whatever challenges the day might bring. Their love, which had started with transparent excuses and seed catalogs, had deepened into something unshakable. They had built a life together that was richer than either had imagined possible, a partnership of equals working toward shared goals. At night, they still read together, sometimes in the library, sometimes in their own parlor. Willa's voice, which had first attracted Jace with its clarity and warmth, had only grown more expressive with age. And Jace, who had once claimed he preferred doing to sitting, had become an avid reader himself, though he still loved best when Willa read aloud. "What should we read tonight?" she asked one evening, surveying their personal shelves. "You choose," he said. "I trust your judgment." She selected a volume of poetry, something new from a writer in Boston, and they settled into their chairs. Outside, their children were playing some elaborate game that involved a great deal of shouting. Inside, it was just the two of them and the words on the page, the same as it had always been. Willa began to read, and Jace listened, and between them was the love they had built from nothing more than a will reading and a cowboy's ridiculous excuses. It had been enough then. It was more than enough now. And it would carry them forward into whatever years remained, together, always together, bound by words and love and the choices they had made to build something lasting in the wild Wyoming territory. The library continued to grow, the children continued to learn, and the Clayton Ranch continued to thrive. And every evening, in a small house on the edge of the property, a woman read to the man who loved her, while outside the stars wheeled overhead and the future unfolded one page at a time. Years later, when people asked how they had met, Jace always told the same story. "I hired her to read my grandfather's will," he would say with that familiar grin. "And then I kept hiring her back to read anything I could think of, because I knew from the first moment that I wanted to spend my life listening to her voice." And Willa would add, laughing, "He used the flimsiest excuses a man ever invented: seed catalogs, livestock reports. Once, I swear, he had me read him a label from a medicine bottle. It was important information," Jace would protest. "It was 3 sentences long. Best 3 sentences I ever heard." And their children, grown now with children of their own, would roll their eyes affectionately and ask for the story again, because love stories never grew old when they were true. The library stood as testament to what could be built when two people saw in each other not just attraction, but possibility. And every book on every shelf was a reminder that words had power. To teach, to inspire, to connect, and sometimes, if you were very lucky, to bring two souls together across the distance of different worlds and bind them into one. In the end, that was the legacy they left. Not just land or cattle or even books, but the example of a love built on mutual respect, on seeing and being seen, on the simple, profound truth that sometimes the best way to someone's heart is to ask them to read you a seed catalog, and mean it when you say you could listen forever.